Everybody, it is 7 o'clock. We want to welcome you to Unknown Philosophers Live. You can find us at unknownphilosophers.com, also on Facebook. We are also now on YouTube and Spotify. We have a great announcement for you this evening. Cosmo and I have had such a fantastic time doing this. We're going to do a season 2. So we've already reached out to some of our guests and some new guests as well that you're going to be really surprised about. So we're really looking forward to that. And then also our finale, we're also reaching out to all of our guests as well to see if they would all come on the show together that evening and we can all hang out. I think that would be wonderful. I also want to thank Brother Jacob Trier for co-hosting last week. He did a fantastic job. It was a lot of fun. And we are so happy to have Brother Cosmo back this evening. How are you doing tonight, Brother Cosmo? It's an evening. It's Friday.
Oh, yeah. I'm doing good, brother. It's just been when you're working and trying to start your own thing going, it's just a lot of work. And but it's going to pay off eventually. So.
Yeah, the Facebook page looks great. If anybody doesn't know, he's opened an Italian restaurant, Fresh Pasta, and I've been watching you. The fresh pasta coming out of the machine, and I can imagine what it's going to smell like when you walk into your restaurant.
Well, we got 3 more weeks to go, and then we should be ready to rock and roll.
All right, fantastic. All right, who do we have tonight?
Brothers, I'd like to invite Brother Francis Fritz. I'll give you a little bit of background of Brother Fritz. He's been on the show before. As a spectator, contributor, but tonight, Brother Fritz is going to give us a special presentation on the Celtics, Druids, and Freemasons, and if there's any connection, obviously. But his background, Brother Fritz lives in Phoenix, Arizona. He's a member of Glendale Lodge number 23. He's a 32nd degree Scottish Rite Mason, a Knight of St. Andrews of the Valley of Phoenix and Orient of Arizona. He's part of the Masonic Society, the Philalethes, can I pronounce this right? The Philalethes Society of the Scottish Rite, the Research Society, and he's also the Lodge Secretary of the Quatuor, Coronati, which is, you guys know, it's one of the largest, actually one of the oldest fraternal Masonic research lodge in the world. And of course, he's also a member of the Research Lodge number 1 here in Phoenix, and a director. Actually, he is the master, by the way. Man, I forgot to mention that. Research Lodge number 1. Yep. Anyways, he's got a lot more other things. He's working on some cool things, and I'm just tonight. I just want to hear his story of the Druids, the Celtics, and Freemasonry, and see where it goes. Have a party.
Yes, welcome, Brother Francis. It's always fun to hang out with you, and you and I and Cosmo have hung out quite a bit, and it's just always a good time, so welcome.
Thanks. I'm looking forward to finally taking all this research I have and seeing what comes from it. So.
All right, wonderful.
You want me to go ahead and start, or you guys want to?
Let's go, brother.
Okay. So first and foremost, okay, I'm gonna yell at you two guys, so it's okay. It's Celtic, not Celtic. So that's
Celtic.
okay.
That's right. It's Celtic.
It's a K. And if Rex would have heard you, Cosmo,
was that a K in there? Did I miss the K?
No, C is a K. So,
that's right. It is Celts. You're right. It's not Celtics.
Only Boston people get that one. So.
Oh my God.
That's all right. It's a very common mistake, believe it or not. That's okay. I'm going to be picking on Cosmo because he's from Italy anyway, so that's all right. And you'll see why in a minute here. But so kind of one of the things that I always start off with when I ask people about what do they know about the Celtic society and the Celtic culture? And a lot of things that I normally get are, well, if they were in Britain and they were in Ireland and that, they were in parts of Scotland and, they had all of this other stuff. Well, that's kind of true. And I'm going to show you here in a minute when I put up my slides, but first thing that I really need to do is kind of give you guys an idea of what you do and do not actually know about the Celtic society. First and foremost, anybody who's ever read the Bible should know about the Celts. So, I got Tony shaking his head and a couple other people. Anybody here ever heard of Paul's epistles to the Galatians? Well, the Romans called the Celts Galli, or the area Galli, or Galatia. You're going to see that here in a minute. So you've heard that. Anybody ever heard of King Arthur?
Oh, yeah.
Guess what? That is it is a Celtic legend that was Christianized many, many years after Christianity took hold and it was passed on and spread out. It was done in France and other areas. But that story is based upon a Celtic legend. Okay? Interesting so far, right?
Yes.
So those are things that a lot of people don't know that it exists. So I'm going to share my screen here. So I've already talked a little bit about the idea. So I'm going to give you a little history on the Celts. And most people don't know where they come from. And this will lead into the Druidic aspect of things, because it's probably where the biggest connection you will find with Freemasonry is with Druidry. So first and foremost, this is our typical idea or concept that we have of Celts and Druids. Anybody who's ever seen the movie The Gladiator with Russell Crowe?
Mm-hmm.
In the very beginning of the movie, they're in Germania and they're fighting the Germanians, right?
Okay.
Those are the Celts.
Oh, nice.
So when you watch the beginning of that movie again, you'll realize who the Celts were. And I'm going to show you here. Now, this is a map of Europe. And all of that green and yellow is the Celtic society.
Wow.
Now, take a look at that because it's going to become very apparent here. Over here, of course, is England and Ireland and Scotland, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you have, but here it is. The reality is if you are from Central European rock, historically speaking, you are a Celt. You have Celtish blood in you already.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, Cosmo, on the other hand, this down here is Italy, right, Cosmo?
Absolutely.
Guess what's not there?
Yeah, but you know what? My mom's side, many years ago, our family migrated down from Austria many moons ago.
Yep. Then you would have
could
brought
have
that in there. Yep. We'll give you partial credit. All right.
My father was born in northern Italy. My father was born in northern Italy,
Yep.
right on the Austrian border of
Yep.
Italy.
So putting this all into perspective, what does all of this mean realistically? Well, okay, this bright yellow area is Galatia, okay? There's parts of it, pieces of it. There's arguments over what it goes. But here's the number one thing. Most people think when I ask them, how long was the Celtic culture around? And they say, oh, a couple hundred years here, 300 years there. Actually, they've been around over 3,000 years. Okay? They are the second oldest culture known to European civilization, including Egypt. Okay? So we know that there's historical evidence that they started about 1300 BC. And of course, one of the things, if you're of Scottish or Irish or Welsh descent, you'll know the term chieftains. What makes it different or difficult to really do is the Celtic, there's really no such thing as a Celtic empire, because what really was going on was they believed that it started right around in here in Germany, and I'll get up to this area here in a few minutes, but what they believe is that when they got to be so big, they had a policy of, okay, pick another chieftain and you people move out. And so they spread around, and you can see how far they spread, right? Now, what makes this really interesting is that 1300 BCE, that's before the Roman Empire. Okay? And what makes it really interesting are some stories, and I know Briggs has seen the documentary, one of the documentaries on this, but there was this little tiny city-state called Rome that kept attacking Celtic Empire or the Celtic lands and raiding them. And because all of these different areas were ruled by different chieftains, you've heard that term now, I'm sure, especially if you're Scottish or Irish, you would have your clan chieftains. He actually got 12 of the tribes, the Celtic tribes, together to go down to Rome and raid Rome, attack Rome, because they were pretty sick and tired of the Romans raiding their territories. And just this little tiny city-state that thought it had big britches. Well, guess what? They did, and they conquered the city of Rome. And they pretty much came close to burning it to the ground. And the Roman people, the leadership, all that was left of the city, settled with, which sounds so obnoxious now, but 1,000 pounds of gold. And then the Celts left. Now, what's the big significance there is that 52 years later, this little known guy by the name of Julius Caesar decided to attack the Celts. Why? Because he was a boy when they raided Rome, and he hated the Celts. And he did a pretty good job of it too, right, Cosmo?
Yep.
Because he took over he conquered at least this whole area. But the Celtic, quote, empire was never totally conquered by the Roman Empire. Now I'll get to that in a minute. And this is the actual Roman Empire. So you kind of get a view of the way it is. And here's Gali again, right? And you can see all these different bits and pieces of it that fell into place. Now, what also makes that unique is, I can't really show it to you up here, but this, by the way, if you can tell, is Scotland over here, Ireland's over here. This is part of Scotland. And there's a big reason why I'm bringing this up here. And it'll pay attention down the road a little bit. But you ever heard of a place called Hadrian's Wall? It's right here. If you can see my pointer, it's on the edge of Scotland and what is now Great Britain. And it was also called the Picts Wall, which, guess what that is? They're Celts. So we know for a fact that they never conquered the Celts completely. And they were left here, northern Scotland and all of Ireland. So that's where that comes from. And Hadrian's Wall, there's other pieces to that come out to it. But that leads me to the next part of this, which is really talking about Druids. We now know that the Celts, oh, by the way, I forgot. A lot of people today will tell you that they believe that the Celtic society still exists. If you're of Irish, Welsh, or Highland Scots descent, you would know the language that they traditionally speak as Gaelic or Gaelic. Gaelic would be Irish, Gaelic would be Scottish.
That's my name, brother. Briggs is Gaelic for a bridge made with river rock.
Right. And that is actual Celtic language. So what the remnants of it, per se. Okay. And it's still spoken today. So some people would say that the society is still there. It still exists. So far we have all of these wonderful little pieces. You now know that it's been around over 3,000 years. You now know that, they beat the Romans at their own game in the very beginning and ticked off this guy by the name of Julius Caesar. Now, if you remember a few weeks ago, I was talking when Brother Cooper was talking, and I asked him a specific question since he's from Scotland. And he said that we don't know a lot about the Celts because they don't have anything written down. Remember that? Well, that's partially true. Okay. And I say that because I'm going to go into it here in a few minutes, but there's evidence all over all over this area, there are actually more archaeological sites of the Celts than there realistically are of all of Egypt. And they're still heavily studied today. And this is Europe today. Now, if you take a look, this right here would have been covering a big part. Now, those of you who are Freemasons will understand two big pieces here. Number one, anybody know what the big deal is around Paris, just north of Paris? For Masons? Got a bunch of no's, people shaking their heads. You ever heard of the cathedral at Chartres or Chartres? Guess where it's located? Smack dab in the heart of Gallic territory. Okay? It'll come back in a minute and I'll explain that to you. But you take a look at, like I said, you're talking Poland, Germany, all of this over here. There's evidence that they were in the steppes of Russia, that they were way over here and had mines over in the steppes of Russia and moving along and doing that. But you can see they actually had more territory than all of Rome did. Okay. Now, another nice little side point is everybody thinks of the Celts as being barbarians, right? Problem with that is that if you were in the Roman Senate, you wanted one of their highly touted robes, because that's one of the things that Celts were highly known for was their wool. And the second thing is they became very, very wealthy based upon salt, which is why they were in the steppes of Russia, okay? Because they actually built 3 miles in, and we're talking BC here, 3 miles into a mountain, and we're actually farming out salt and shipping it all over Central Europe at that time, okay? So we got most of that stuff out of the way. We got a little bit of this going on, a little bit of that. So what does that mean? Well, what that means is we have a society that's been around a long, long time. And most historians at this point in time will tell you that they are considered now to be the first society as a whole who believed in the immortality of the soul. Now, a lot of people will give Pythagoras credit for he was bringing it up that way, but there is way too much evidence that the Celts, long before, believed in the immortality of the soul. Now,
in some of these ancient structures that are over 3,000 years old, and these stones that are sticking up everywhere, they're tied to their ancestors, right? I mean, they lived as if the ancestors were still alive. They were very, very close to them. That's something that I was reading about today. That's really interesting.
Yeah, one of the things that when you talk about Julius Caesar, most of the information that we have about the Celtic society and Druids, especially Druids, comes from early Greek writers and, of course, Julius Caesar when he was trying to conquer the Celts. And, of course, just like they always say, the winner gets to pick history, right? So a lot of it. He talks about the Celts as being barbarians because they used to cut the heads off of their enemies. Well, he doesn't really explain why. And that was because Celtic society believed that the soul resided in your head. And if they took your head, you couldn't move on to the next life and then come back again, which is the Fae. And there's history, there's thousands and thousands of graves where the Celtic warriors were actually buried up and down. They weren't buried laying flat, up and down with no heads. And as that goes through the process, you'll kind of get an idea of where that goes. So first off, that's the first flag that I always came up with, was the fact is it was the first society that believed in the immortality of the soul. And as Masons, we're supposed to believe in the immortality of the soul, right? So it's there. By the way, when I started doing all this research back in the day, it had nothing whatsoever to do with Freemasonry. So that's why the name on this is on there. I began to study and to learn things, and there were way too many coincidences, okay? So we know now that it's been pretty busy. Anybody ever seen this before? Okay. So think of it as a triangle, which it is. Okay. It also stands for the triad or the triune of, in Celtic religious, I guess if you call it religious, every god has three sides to it. Think of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit, Father, Son, Holy Ghost. They also have 33 total gods. So you can get the idea that 3 is kind of an important number, right? So big deal there. Now, also speaking of the gods, which is very interesting about all of the gods that they have, you've probably heard of Cuchulainn, Cúrduin. There's 33 of them, right? Pretty much. They all may have come under different names. But what makes them very unique is the fact is they were all human. I say that again. They were human, and they crossed over to the Fae. You've heard that term before, right? Nowadays we call them fairies. They went over to the Fae and became immortal. And there's all sorts. If you ever read any Irish folklore, all of those pieces come back and will tell you that that is very accurate from their standpoint. That should also tell you something very interesting, because now I'm going to start talking about Druids. And Druids themselves, most people don't realize that, like Brother Cooper said, they actually were the intelligentsia of the Celtic people. And what I mean by that is they were doctors, they were lawyers, they were kings sometimes, they were judges, they were the intelligent folks. Okay, these were the de facto leaders within the Celtic society per se. Now, give you some things, and you might want to start paying attention to this in comparison.
Hey, Brother Fritz?
Yes.
Can I stop you just for 1 second? I'm just staring at the symbol here. There are 33 points to this whole combination here. The 33 gods you just talked about. Mm-hmm. They touch every point inside this sigil, or I can see it. I mean, I just counted 33. It's kind of interesting. I thought I saw that.
Well, see, and again, you're going to find this everywhere. This is called a Celtic rope. Okay. So as a Celtic rope, yeah, everything's connected, and that's part of the Druidic philosophy, I guess would be the way that I would put it. Everything is connected. Does that make sense? And I'm going to get into that as we go. So you've seen this one before, right? Tree of Life, very simple. It's in a lot of faiths and a lot of religions, and it's a lot of pieces. You will hear Julius Caesar talking about the Druids go to their solemn temples within basic tree groves. And we do know that the Druids looked at specific trees as being special, being holy, and being that. But the Tree of Life, if you've ever heard the idea behind the Tree of Life is that as above, so below. You've heard it a lot of different ways. That is a reoccurring Druidic theme. And I'm not talking about the modern day Druidic aspect. I'm talking about some ancient aspects of it, which is very difficult. And this is coming again, mostly from research dealing with many of the Greek writers, as well as Julius Caesar's works and some of the others. Okay.
And then also, Brother Fritz, they have just recently found some structures where they have these stone walls. They'll have a tree that's been uprooted and flipped upside down with the roots up. Mm-hmm. And by studying this, they learned that for them, heaven was actually the below and not the above, which I found really interesting because we can see that in the older cultures. That's so cool. Thank you.
Well, that gets into the whole Fae idea, okay? So that you're talking about. A lot of people think of Fae, and I'll get into that in a minute because it has a lot to do with our perception of what Druidry is, okay? I'll give you another sideline that's very interesting. You may have heard of the society, the ancient society of bards and druids that was started in England. Bet you didn't know, though, that it started about 2 blocks away from where the original Grand Lodge of England actually got started, 3 days apart. So now, anybody who studies and part of the things, you know that there's the Golden Dawn. Those were started by Freemasons and all these other pieces that are there. Now, what made the Druids special? Well, Julius Caesar writes in his whole volumes and volumes of his conquest of the Celts, seeing a Druid in the middle of the battlefield while the battle is going on doing open heart surgery, and the guy surviving. Talks about watching them put a man's brain back into his head and the man surviving. This is Caesar again, okay? And they're talking about herbology. We're talking about, Caesar talks about alchemy and how they are seers and they are diviners. And these are coming from Caesar, and you can say whatever you want. And he was trying to prove that they were barbarians, but I think he proved the opposite, basically. Okay, these are very people. Now, to become a Druid in those days, and we still know this because there is still the ancient school of bards, which has been passed on through the thousands of generations, traditionally in the Irish, Welsh area. Okay, so here's where the Freemasonry connection starts again, potentially. Okay, when you have 3 degrees that you basically will go through as a Druid. The first is a bard. The second is an ovate. The third would be a Druid. Okay, so you start off as a young person. You move through degrees. The first 3 degrees takes roughly 3 years, and they spend all of their time learning all of the moral and ethical lessons, better known as allegories, in those 3 years. Now, all of the Irish, Welsh legends and myths and all those other pieces, that's what they were basically learning. And if you read them, you will see that those are moral and ethical lessons being taught within them. Okay? Then they move on to the next 5 years of their training, so 5 more degrees. And they expand upon that. They learn things like herbology. They may move into a direction at that point in time where they would learn maybe surgery, or they would, whatever the different parts that were needed at that time. Now, think of when I said King Arthur before, right? And you think of Merlin the Wizard, because you mentioned it earlier, right? Okay. Merlin in the Celtic stories was a Druid, and he was responsible for the health of the king and making sure all those other pieces were there. So he was the highest level. The next level is 7 degrees, right? And of course, if you know ancient, and I say ancient at this point in time, Masonic rites, they also have 12 more degrees, okay? And I say that not from Scottish Rite, but if you add that all up to that time frame, it takes roughly 20 plus odd years just to be able to, quote, be a Druid, okay? And they were experts in all these areas, and we have enough evidence to that. They were judges, juries. They did all of these different bits and pieces, which brings me back to 2 things that I said before, because some people call them priests as part of the religion. There's argument that they may or may not be. They were those that passed on the tradition, which is the whole bardic aspect of things. So that might be possible, but there is not a lot there. So that leads me to, you've heard of St. Patrick, right? Okay. Did you know he was a Druid? Did you know he was Celtic? He was a Briton, and he was captured by the Picts, which were basically at that time Northern Irish, Scottish, okay? And he was taken prisoner and a slave for 6 years when he was young, and he was actually made a slave of a Druid. And you bring that back into the picture, he escapes, he comes back. Now, they don't know for 100%. You'll see some stories that will say that he was Celtic, but he was Christian already because his father was a deacon in the local church. He may have been of Roman descent. I've read more that he was actually Celtic. He was Celtic, but they were Christian Celts because they were living under Roman rule during that time, which of course was the Catholic Church, the Christian Catholic Church. So you're having those pieces come along, and then he goes back. He wasn't even Irish. So that's one of those really interesting pieces. And if you ever want to read some really interesting Druidic stories versus St. Patrick, go read his biography that was written after he died, because there's a lot of stuff about his magic taking on the magic of the Druids and all these other pieces. What does that got to do with anything? Well, it has to do with the fact is that when you hear a lot of times that the Celts didn't write anything down. It's not true. The Druids never wrote anything down. They believe strictly in mouth to ear, mouth to ear, mouth to ear, which is a very common thing. Now, when you read about St. Patrick's story in itself, right, you will see that they're talking about he would go in and go to my next level here and burn libraries. Now, if the Celts didn't write anything down, what kind of libraries would there be? Now, there's a belief that what they did was because there are runes, there's an actual Celtic language that is in writing called Ogham or Oghram, depending on which version of it you want to look at, which is basically somewhat like hieroglyphs, okay? And there are stones of these all over the place. Well, they believe that these libraries were sacred tree branches that had been printed onto these things, okay? So people carved in what it was, and it was easy to burn, and St. Patrick wanted to get rid of, quote, all of the pagan aspect of things, which, by the way, I just read an article not too long ago that a lot of language professionals believe now the word pagan was meant to represent the Celts, and it had no religious connotation to it at all originally, which is interesting because it is a Latin word. So it goes through that process. So when you look at all of these bits and pieces of everything that's going on, you have, number one, the immortality of the soul piece. You have something that we do in every one of our degrees. The Celts and the Druids called it circumambulation. Do you know what that is? Of course, right? They call it a diesel, right? And it's still done today in northern Scotland. And basically what it means is that and depending on which direction that you go, you're either offering good luck or you're saying goodbye to someone in a funeral. So you're walking around the house with a fire. And if you go in the direction of the sun, it's good luck. If you go the opposite direction, guess what you're doing? It's bad luck, right? Okay. So go to the next one. This is a true Celtic cross. What does that mean? Well, I've seen a couple of Masonic things where they talk about a Celtic cross being a traditional Christian cross. This is a true Celtic cross, okay? What relevance does it have? Well, if you take a look at it, it's a point within a circle. Would you agree? Okay. Here's another part. The start of all Druidic ceremonies starts with the Druid standing in the middle of that circle. Okay. So he's standing on the point. So far, we're dead on, right? So when you're doing a Masonic ceremony, when you're walking the candidate around, where's the first place you stop? In the south, right? Would you agree with that? Go to the south, go to the west, and then you go to the east. Guess where a Druidic ceremony starts? In the south. He stands in the south, he says a prayer, and he offers up a gift. Then he goes to the west, offers up a gift, and he does not go to the north again. He goes to the east and offers up a gift. Now, guess what the three most common gifts that they offer up? You may have heard of them. Corn, wine, and oil. Okay? So there you are again. And they do this again, and under special ceremonies, they do the exact same thing again, except this time they use something a little bit different. You may have heard of them. Clay, charcoal, you get it, right? Those are things that have been done. And they know this has been done because they found stone Celtic circles that have done these things, okay? And again, if you go into it and do a little studying, the Druids don't talk about the north. The north is where the gods live. The north is where the Fae are. And that's where you don't cross that except certain times of the year, right? And you've probably heard of some of those. We call them Halloween, Easter, right? We call them all of those pieces of the puzzle. So you have all of these things already falling into play. And these are all coincidences with Masonic practices. Would you agree? They're just coincidences because we could probably go back and look at a lot of them. Tony's shaking his head. No.
I'm as you're going through this, is it possible that the founders of Masonry were Druids?
Well, let me get to that.
Okay.
Because I might be able to answer your question, okay?
Right.
So let's keep on going. Here's the next one. Here's another Celtic cross. It shows the point within a circle a lot clearer, right? Okay. Here's our point within a circle. Now, what to Tony's point. So how many of you have ever read Anderson's Constitutions? And have read the history of Anderson's Constitutions? Guess what? The Celts, the Picts are in the history of Freemasonry in Anderson's Constitutions. I'll look it up. Page 27 starts at the bottom. And it says, and I'm looking under the very first one. It says, as the Celtic edifices erected by the ancient Gauls. Why don't we talk about Masons? Why don't we talk about the Celts? Well, it's just one of those things that seems to have been forgotten down the road, right? Now, when you think about that, could they have been Druids? Well, we know for a fact that some of the early Masons were following Druidic concepts. You've heard of Elias Ashmole, big time, right? The guy, one of the two guys that started the Golden Dawn, right? He started 2 Druidic lodges within Masonry. And then they did the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn also, okay? So there are quite a few of the early believers or the early people who created the formal version of that, Tony, that believed in the Druidic aspect of things. So go ahead.
I'm sorry, Francis. Here's what's interesting, too. I was thinking about that symbol you have up here today. You know, archaeology is not that old, maybe a little over 100 years or something like that. And this part of the world is now, like you said, heavily under archaeological digs. They're finding structures and tools and stuff everywhere. What I found interesting is their houses were built circular because they were farmers. So they were inspired by the seasons. And their doors, you know, the light would shine in on certain solstices at their temples and stuff like that. But what's interesting about their house is they were all round. The fire pit was in the center, like the sun. And they would use bricks from the older family homes or stone within those fires. And then they would have a bed on the left, a bed on the right. And as you walked in, you would see a chest in front of you on the other side. You'd have a cubby in this corner, one on the right, back, and left. And I just found that interesting that they were very civilized. Because we're finding this out, unfortunately, the Roman history kind of showed that maybe they had civilized them. But now that we're uncovering this stuff, we're knowing that these Druids were the high priests. You know, they were the doctors, the scientists. And when they got wiped out, well, then the language, you know, all the information was gone. You know, now we just have, you know, a bunch of circles. Again, even their artwork, everything is circular. I found that very interesting. Thanks for letting me jump in there.
Yeah, no worries. And to get to your point, the argument can be made that they weren't completely wiped out. There are arguments that if you go back and look at it as the Romans were conquering mainland Europe, you know, the Brits, or everybody was going to the British Isles and moving up into that direction and ended up there, where the Picts in the northern Scotland is. There are beliefs that there's evidence to show that there were very specific Druidic schools around the Isle of Man in that area. Very, very big evidence to show that. And if you take a look at where the Romans never conquered the Celts, that's the area. And it would make sense, because if they would consider it holy, if they would consider that a very specific area, then they would do so. But we look at that time frame. If you really take some time and take a look at some of the archaeological finds that they have, they were way ahead of their time for weaponry. And you and I were talking a little earlier about what's called a torque, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at some of the torques that they have found that were intertwined with gold and silver and bronze in thin stripes and then bound together to look like rope. By the way, for those of you who don't know, a torque was something that all of the Celts wore around their neck. Think of an Ouroboros, right? There are a couple in Germany that actually have a head of a snake eating the tail, and they wore it around their neck. It was a symbol of power. It was a symbol of authority. And the nicer yours was, obviously the better it was. But these were craftsmen. These were artists. These were not barbarians by any means. But again, a lot of Caesar's writing, you will find where he talks about them as such, because he's writing back to Rome because he wants power, because he wasn't in charge at that time. So
they get politicized.
Exactly. They were being used, right? Well, and then when you go and look at some of the Greek writings, they're a little nicer about it. And the Greeks actually give us the alchemy part. They give us all of those other pieces, because they talk about how, and I talk about the spiritual alchemy per se more so, and the herbology. They talk about all of those pieces.
They were distilling.
And they talk about all of these things that the Druids could do with herbs. Perfect example, you'll see a typical picture of a Druid cutting with a scythe. He'd be cutting up mistletoe, right? Well, here's the funny part about that. Mistletoe doesn't grow in England, Wales, Ireland, or Scotland. I don't know if people knew that. It is not a natural product. So where would we get that idea of a Druid doing that? We know that Druids believed that mistletoe was sacred. Anybody know why? Because it's one of the few plants that doesn't touch the ground or grow in the air. It grows in a tree.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I saw when I lived in Poland, there was a lot of mistletoe and trees.
Yeah.
Wow.
It doesn't grow naturally in England, Ireland. It was one of those things that ended up being brought over, and they believe it was brought over by Druids. And go ahead, whoever.
Yeah. One of the interesting things too, I found, one of the tools they found was something that looked like an ankh, but it was very long on the bottom. And I believe, just like the Egyptians, just like Freemasons, that these working tools were also used as symbols. I don't know if you have found this in the initiation. Were they using working tools also as symbols during initiation? Because what they would use this tool for was to measure the water. So then that symbol becomes, a symbol of life. Just like the ankh, they believe that it was also used. They would go to the Nile, these long ones, and it had lines, and then they would kind of check to see, how deep the Nile is. Have you seen any connection to that? And then just to let you guys know, we're at about the 15-minute mark, so we might want to open up to Q&A.
Yeah. Take a look at the picture. You see anything unique in it? Look at the altar. What's on the front of the altar?
It looks like a harp.
I'm zooming in there. Let's see. Yeah, it does look like a harp.
Yep.
And the altar of fire.
By the way, Brother Fritz, Also, you know about burning and herbs. That's where we get the burning of the sage from in the Catholic,
Right.
Oh,
it comes from the Celtic tradition as well.
This painting is called Caesar Massacring the Druids.
Yeah.
Wow.
wow.
And you notice the altar, you notice the pieces of it, you notice all the parts there.
Yeah.
I'll bet you if you take a look at this harp over here, looks more like a square to me.
Yeah, I thought that at first.
Or a compasses, but if you count the number here, there's 33 of them.
Oh, that's fantastic.
So you take a look at and you see this person is trying to protect it, it looks like, as they're being stabbed.
Yeah, that was one of the things the archaeologists realized. They were willing to die for they were willing to die. They were not going to surrender.
Yeah, the Celtics, the Celtic society was known for some really interesting things too. When it comes to, most people don't realize this. Think about the time frame that these people lived, that women had as much power and had as much authority. The women had equal ability to divorce. They were warriors. They were the leaders of their clans. This was unheard of during this time.
And you see it in the jewelry because of the feminine jewelry. They have royal feminine jewelry that definitely proves that. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when you take a look at all of these things, you talk about they believed in freedom and liberty. And when you think about, that's why I hesitate to call it an empire, because it was basically, hey, we got too many people here. Anybody want to volunteer and go to the next place? Right? And they'd pick somebody to be the chieftain and move on, and they would do that. Sometimes it was a man, sometimes it was a woman. If you want to read a really interesting true story, there was a woman chieftain who took on the Romans for many, many years. And there's a giant statue of her in London right now. And I can't think of her name off the top of my head, but it's a beautiful statue. But she's probably one of the best known Celtic chieftains, and she was a warrior. And that actually scared the Romans originally, because they got women fighting them, and they're like, well, they're just crazy. So because they're used to not women being that way, and that's a huge thing.
Yes.
By the way, here's my last slide. This is not Celtic. This is Proto-Celtic, and you know that's Stonehenge, right? Okay.
Yes.
Right.
So most people call, and that's where I come up with it. It's older than any Celtic faith whatsoever, any Celtic society, by almost 500 years. Most people call this Celtic, but it's not. It's Proto-Celtic.
You're talking about Boudica, the warrior queen, London.
Yes, Boudica. That's her name. Yes. By the way, when I mentioned Cerdwin and I mentioned Cuchulainn, another thing about is their allegories have human beings in them, and they were real people.
Yeah.
Now we know that King Solomon was real, right? We know King of Tyre was real. We know Hiram Abiff was real, right? But it was still an allegory. And
yeah.
Go ahead.
I often wonder if a lot of that came over from India, the Indo-European, a lot of the instruments and stuff like that I've noticed have kind of match up with that stuff and the coinage and I often wonder about that.
There's a huge argument, relating to, where did the culture come from, and there is a lot of evidence to show that the Indo-Asian aspect of things when you talk about the Druidic aspects of the belief, you see that a lot, very similar pieces. The Indo-Asian aspect of how you could cross over and come back from without being dead. That's huge. If you look in anybody who wants to really, I was trying to see if I could find my book real quick, but read the Irish folklore. and you'll get a really big sense that it's no different than the Hiram Abiff aspect of things, or, you know, the allegorical aspect, because you're Masons. Because, you know, again, thanks to St. Patrick, a lot of those were changed. Matter of fact, if you want to see something really interesting, go actually look at the traditional aspect of leprechauns and fairies before that was Christianized to be a fairy tale. And you would be shocked to see that isn't at all what it is. Leprechauns were mean critters. And they were... Go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to thank you, Brother Fritz. This presentation has been fantastic. It's, you know, I study all these other cultures and have my whole life, but I've never studied my own DNA, where my ancestors came from. And just you coming on the show the past week, I've just been kind of digging and reading, and it has been fascinating. And I'd like to talk to you sometime more about the initiation. You know, a civilized culture always has initiation. They always have ritual. They always raise people to be decent in their culture. It's very interesting. Cosmo, do you have any questions? And then we'll see if we can get a couple of our guests in here tonight.
Brother Fritz, I just want to say that is probably one of I think that's one of my favorite presentations that you put on. And I mean, there's a lot of stuff going in my head right now. This is your book. You got to write this. You got to get it published. I would love to help you with this. If you need help on the Roman side, I got a lot of Roman stuff here. I
don't know. The Romans aren't too good in my book. So, you know, it's...
By the way, that statue, John Opie is the one that's carved it out in 1761. He was one of the founders of the Grand Lodge of England. Yeah, and he's also a Druid.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, I just found that.
That is awesome.
So
see, that's Tony. There you go. See, there's a lot of that we just hide or we don't know.
Yeah,
you know.
Well, these things had to originate from somewhere, and once I learned that the Druids were, in essence, the skilled tradesmen and the professionals, that they were the ones that preserved it and refined it to become Masonry. I mean, that would be my perspective on this.
Yeah. And you know, I could probably go deeper. I didn't want to go into this, but Briggs, when you talk about initiation, a Druidic, so you take a apprentice or soon to be apprentice and you initiate them, the initiation ceremony will scare you, because it is dead on with how we do the entered apprentice initially. It is dead on.
That's incredible.
And
incredible.
It's not just one example I found. I found it in a Greek, what's his name? Hepatitis. He writes about he witnessed an initiation of a new Druidic apprentice, and there's a couple other later Greek authors that witnessed it. And when you read their version of it, you're like, that's an entered apprentice degree.
You know what? One of the things I absolutely love about being a Freemason is after about maybe 4 or 5 years, you've gone to some degrees, you've asked about the symbols, and now these symbols become a part of you. And then when you start studying these other cultures, they pop up and they keep popping up. And then you learn how they were used. And, you know, our brothers knew this stuff. If I look at Morals and Dogma, you know, in Pike's time, you open the back and half of the back of the page is about the Essenes. They hadn't even dug up any of those, you know, so they knew about this stuff. This is incredible. Do we have any other questions from anybody else from the audience tonight for Brother Fritz?
JC's got a question.
JC.
He said something about it. I can't read it because I can't read the chat box. Do you have a suggested reading list? I think one of the very first ones that I would start with is one that's called A Brief History of the Druids. And it's an academic book, so it's kind of dry. But that book blew me away. Hold on a second, and I'll get it.
Well, he's getting that, Cosmo. Man, I've been spending the past week studying this stuff, and just the past like 2 years, the archaeological stuff that they have found, where they have kind of pulled up the Roman roads and have found the ancient wooden roads underneath, which took a huge group of people to put together.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. And when you think about it, if you know the story behind Anderson's constitutions, right? He was trying to take all of the ancient charges, all the old charges, all the things mixed together. Why in the world would he even mention the Celts or the Picts? You know, and the way they are mentioned, I mean, it's in an area where a lot of it is disparaging to other cultures, but not the Celtic culture and not the Picts, right?
Yeah.
So there has to be something there. And I found that out recently, believe it or not. That wasn't even something new. I mean, it was new to me, but I mean, I just realized that I'm taking a class right now on some ancient Freemason material where it was brought to my attention by doing the reading. And why don't we talk about it? That's my whole argument.
We're doing it right now, my brother.
Yeah. By the way, you may get your own documentary. I just texted Brother Johnny Royal. I think this will be a good next topic.
You know, it's interesting when I was looking into it. I mean, there's really, you know, there's definitely room in that topic of scholarly work. That's for sure. I would love to see. You know, they said Newgrange. Everybody knows that. I think it was built 3200 BC. They're saying that's the oldest megalith in the Ireland area. And I also find it interesting that all these cultures built with stone. They didn't build with mud or any other material. That's something that's very unique to us. We learned from Bob Cooper was the first building in the Bible was King Solomon's temple that was built with actual stone. So I could see that connection as well. That's very interesting. They're very good at stone masonry as well.
Well, you look at some of again, there's a really good on Netflix. There's a really good 3-part documentary on the Celts. It's called The Celts, and it's done through German historians and archaeologists. And you go in to see some of the stuff that they've uncovered there in Germany, and it will blow you away because they were not barbarians in any way, shape, or form. These were very intelligent people, even if you look at how their cities were built.
Yeah. Yeah, that thing's made out of quartz stone. I think it's been rebuilt, but yeah, it's made out of quartz. It's interesting. And they're all astrologically set up, again, for, you know, winter, summer solstice. And then, you know, they would have those huge processions that went to all these different places. And they would celebrate their ancestors. And again, you know, I guess that's the last thing I'd like to say about the topic is that's the one thing that got me the most was they didn't just bury their ancestors in a funeral burial ground. They lived with them. They were under the house. They were represented by those stones you see sticking up out of the ground. So you'll see a circle of those stones sticking up. Those were relatives, and at one time, the first relative's house was built in the center. So they bring a youth in, and then they could teach them the genealogy, which is just, I get the chills just thinking about what that must have been like.
They have actually in one of the, I can't remember which one of the museums in Germany that they actually cut out on the side of the mountain and the actual grave of a warrior chieftain. And still in the dirt, and it's sitting in the museum now. Wow. And he's standing straight up, no head, right? But you look at the armor and all of the weapons that he had, and they had chariots, which is kind of cool. Yeah. Because if you look at the style of the chariots, and they basically just cut the funeral area or the entire area, and then built a museum around it, basically. So
that's fantastic. That is awesome. Well, hey guys, we're at the top of the hour. I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. I especially want to thank everybody on Facebook. Looks like we had quite a few people on there. Thank you for supporting us. Everybody on Zoom. Also, we'll be on YouTube. I want to send a great thank you out to Brother Kenneth Van Hop. I hope you're doing well, brother. He's been through a little health problems, but he sent out an email today, which got a lot of brothers connected that had never seen the show before. We're going to have our next show next Saturday. We've got Brother Jeremy from Refracted Light. That is going to be awesome. We're going to talk about his show, Just Masons, which is a fantastic show. And do you have anything to leave us with, Brother Cosmo?
I just want to thank everybody for being on. I'd like to thank Brother Fritz for bringing this beautiful, uncovered, uncharted territory of Freemasonry. This is now something that we're going to start more to talk about and put it out in the open, because I think it's a very important subject to explore more deeper. Again, Brother Ken, glad to see you back. Thank you for putting this out as well on the Scottish Rite. Brother Nelson, thank you so much for joining us from the Philippines. This is your second.
Yeah, Brother Nelson.
All right.
Yeah, welcome.
Yes,
Hi.
yes.
Welcome. Great to see you guys.
Yeah.
Good to see you, brother.
Yeah, very interesting.
Anyways, that's all I have for tonight. I'm looking for the next show, and I'm looking for season 2 as well. I think we're gonna have a great time next year as well.
It's going to be awesome. Well, Brother Fritz, we can't thank you enough. As a tradition on our show, we always ask our guests if they could possibly leave us some words of wisdom to get us through the week. And then once you do that, we'll go ahead and end the show. And I'll just, by saying best wishes to everybody, have a wonderful weekend. We'll leave it to you, Brother Fritz.
If you could do me a favor, if anybody has any questions, or like JC wanted reading material, you know how to get a hold of me. Just, you can put that out there, my email address. To get to words of wisdom, always question what reality is when it comes to what you're told history is. And the more you question it and the more you research it and study it, the more you'll see that history is usually made by the winners. But it isn't history.